Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirame Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas satbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is a mind on a diet. Going on a diet is a phrase that we generally use with regard to food, and it's related to health. We all know what it means to be on a diet. It means to take matters of food seriously, to be on watch regarding what goes inside and how much of it, and make sure that the food that we eat contributes towards our health and well-being and not the opposite. So that meaning is quite clear. When do we need to go on a diet? When we become conscious that we need it. Or if we don't become conscious, someone else makes us conscious of it. Oftentimes, maybe our doctor or maybe our friends. So whenever we become aware of the need to go on diet, we tend to do so. Now, three factors need to be taken into account in matters related to diet. One is, first of all, obviously, the awareness of our need for it. Secondly, the kind of food and its quantity. And thirdly, the quality of food. In the Upanishad called the Chandogya Upanishad, we have one passage related to food. In Sanskrit, it goes like this. Ahara shuddhau sattva shuddhihi sattva shuddhau dhruva smritihi smritilambhe sarva granthinam vipramokshaha, which means when the food is pure, our mind becomes pure. When the mind is pure, the memory becomes strong and stable. When the memory is thus acquired, all the knots of the heart are removed. Now, this passage that occurs in one of the oldest of the Upanishads has been commented upon by many scholars. Beginning among the earliest commentaries that we have is by Shankaracharya in the 8th century, and then later by Ramanuja in the 11th century. And then further down, this particular passage has been commented upon and discussed at length. So there is this word when food is taken and its connection with memory and its connection with our spiritual health. So what is meant by food in this quotation? It clearly means the food as we understand it, and we know how our physical growth is connected with the intake of food. The Sanskrit word that is used in this passage is ahara. Now, ahara, although translated as food, taken literally, it means that which is taken in. So there is is a prefix, ahara. Ahara literally means taking it in. It's to the doorway of the mouth we take inside the food that is outside. But it's also possible to say that we eat food not only through the mouth, but also through our other senses. When we eat food, we first of all get to taste it. The very moment we put it in the mouth, we get to taste it before the food goes to the more uninteresting task of digestion. There is no fun. That just happens. And we hope it happens smoothly. But the very first thing that happens when we eat food is we get to taste it. But taste is not the only sense that gets to enjoy the food. there is often the flavor of fragrance that wafts over the air, especially if you are hovering around the kitchen area, you can see. In fact, there is an ancient saying in Sanskrit, Granena Ardha Bhojanam. That is, if the food is, the smell, the fragrance is good, that's almost like eating half of it. But also, so that the sense of smell gets to taste food as well. But also a tastefully arranged food in a plate. Sometimes you go to a good restaurant, they'll usually bring it in a plate and it's very tastefully put there. And that is pleasing to the eyes as well. That's another way our sense of sight gets to enjoy the food. And those who prefer to use fingers instead of a spoon and fork get to feel the texture of the food. Very soft, hard, warm, cold. So there's one more sense that gets employed in tasting that food. So that's this added joy of taste as well. So that which goes in through the mouth is the food for the body. That which goes in through the senses of taste, smell, sight, and touch. And if the food is especially crunchy, then the sense of hearing as well. Now, through all of these, this is all food for the mind, which goes in through the senses. The five senses bring in all the sensory delights, not only of the food that we put in the mouth, but the sensory delights that come to us from other things in the world. And all of these things are feeding the mind. The colors that we see around us, the various forms, the fragrances, the textures that provide a different feel, the music, as well as the random sounds, are all food for the mind. All the ideas and information that come in through these sensory devices are also food for the mind. Now, just as we need to be conscious about the quality and quantity of food that we take in through our mouths, we need to be, because we know it's necessary for the well-being of the body, we should be conscious also about the quality and quantity of food that we take in through our senses, because that is very important for the well-being of the mind. The question is, are we conscious of it? Many of us today increasingly are becoming conscious about the food that we eat. Generally, there is a popular misconception that healthy foods are not as tasty as foods which are not considered healthy. Someone said, nothing makes me so sick as health foods. But it doesn't have to be. It's possible for food to be healthy and tasty as well. I mean, one of the problems is that which we often dismiss as junk food, people find that more tasty, and that's why it's always available on market. But are we conscious? Many of us are increasingly becoming conscious about the kind of food that we eat. Are we being equally conscious about the food that is being consumed by the mind through all the senses? And that is the focus for this morning's reflection. Now, the two, the body and the mind, we spoke about the food for the body and food for the mind. But the body and mind are related. The ancient form of Indian medicine, Ayurveda, recognized this connection between body and mind long ago. And modern medicine does also recognize it today. In Vedantic perception of the human personality, where we have the body, mind, and then the spirit, according to the Vedantic way of understanding these parts or dimensions of our personality, both the body and mind are considered material. That the body is material, we recognize. It's not too difficult to know. Today we also know the chemical composition of the body. We know what happens when the body disintegrates. All that is known. It's not so often recognized that the mind is material as well, because mind seems almost very spiritual. In fact, a lot of times, a calm and peaceful state of the mind itself, sometimes people say, oh, that's very spiritual. The word spiritual sometimes gets used a bit too often, I think, even to matters that don't relate to the spirit. So sometimes when we look at a beautiful sunrise or sunset, or hear some really uplifting music, now all of these things can touch the spirit, but a lot of times what they do is really bring about some great, a peaceful, harmonious state of the mind. And then to equate that peaceful, harmonious state of the mind as spiritual is not really technically correct. And so we need to recognize the distinction of how and where there is a line of separation. Now, in Vedantic understanding, the body and mind are considered both material, and the spirit is the only non-material part of our being. And because both body and mind are material, they have to follow the laws of matter. They are bound, they are within this domain of matter. The only difference between the body and the mind is that, well, we can see the body, we don't see the mind. That's probably the only difference. In every other respect, they are very identical. We just spoke about the food for the body, the food for the mind. Both need their food. If we put unhealthy food in the body falls sick. If we put unhealthy stuff, ideas, the mind can get sick. Both have their doctors. Both can get exhausted. Pretty much whatever happens to the body can happen to the mind. And we know that they are related because when the body is unwell for an extended length of period, we know it affects the mind as well. And oftentimes, if the mind is not well, it has its repercussions on physical health as well. They would not be able to act and interact upon one another if they didn't belong to the same level of reality. And that's why they both being material is understandable. Just because we don't see the mind doesn't make it spiritual. We don't see an isolated electron for that matter. And that's very spiritual about an electron. So just because we don't see something should not make us think that it is non-material. So the kind of food-related problems that the body can experience, the mind can experience as well. So what are the kind of food-related problems that are common? One is clearly indigestion. We know that undigested food can create trouble in the body, and undigested food for the mind can create trouble in the mind. What we digest is related to what we ingest. If we take in junk or something that is not nutritious, then indigestion should not surprise us. How much of what we take in through our senses is junk or something that we don't need at all? And this is becoming increasingly a difficult situation. Well, I don't think it was any time easy, even in the ancient times. But while technology has made things easier in many respects and has been a blessing in many ways, it can also be a curse. It's a mixed, if at all, the best way probably would be to say it's a mixed blessing. If we can use some of the blessings of technology that have become available to us today in an intelligent way, we can benefit from it. But if we do it in a somewhat careless way, then we might suffer from indigestion. And in the even after the computers came in, when there were just the desktops, if you wanted to get something, you had to actually go towards the computer and take it in. But now with this mobile devices, pretty much every smartphone is a computer in its own right. And so information, communication being so easily available, there is an increase of indigestion that is occurring through the things that are being fed to the mind. How often do we look at our phones for your RSS feeds or your emails or messages? Now, in itself, that's great, that's helpful. But because we just kind of pick it in, look up and keep it down maybe hundreds of times in the course of a day, we may not realize, if you add up all that, how much time is going in that, and how much interruption does occur in whatever it is that we are doing. So a sustained engagement with any physical activity, or a sustained engagement, which is somewhat more difficult, is even with some thinking, some thought, is becoming difficult because these constant interruptions. It would be so difficult nowadays to be just sitting, even if people go on the bank of a river, you go to a park, or you just go on a vacation, to just sit and think. But if the phone is nearby, when people get bored, the only way they find to overcome that boredom is just picking up the phone and do something on it, even if that is totally unnecessary. Somehow we feel that there may be things happening in this world somewhere, which if I don't get to know them immediately, then my life is going to change drastically. That whatever somebody's saying, whatever comment maybe the president of the country is making, if I don't get to know it immediately and react to it and forward whatever seems interesting to me to a bunch of people or everyone on my address book, then we feel life would be totally useless. And sometimes these are not in themselves harmful activities, but what they do is that they don't give me the chance to give some rest to my mind. A scholar friend of mine I met last week, he had resisted using the iPhone for a long time. He didn't have any smartphone. He still had that old style. Remember there used to be a phone without a screen? He still used that for a long time. And then about a few months ago, he told me he had got an iPhone. And so I asked him, I said, how are you enjoying your iPhone? And he said, yeah, it's good. But then he said, yes, it can do a bunch of things. But now I realize it's impossible for me to go back to that old phone. So things that we felt we could do without, we create new needs, and then those needs become like life would be impossible without that. So again, I'm not decrying the use of technology. It can do a lot of good, but it can reach a point when the ideas, the thoughts, the information, the various kinds of data that we take in may not be necessary for us. And if we take in what's not necessary, or perhaps even that which is distracting or which is harmful, then it can create an indigestion of the mind the way there can be an indigestion when we take in food. Even when we take in food that is needed, we still need to digest it. So what does it mean to digest the food that the mind takes in? In the ancient system of education, when there were no books, um, long before books came in, think about it this way, even as far back maybe a few centuries ago, before printing technology came in, it was only very wealthy people could afford to have a few books with them, because all of the books had to be written, and then that itself was an industry, and they were very expensive. So the ease with which information has become available, the ease with which we get to think, has been a blessing, but also been a curse in many ways. So in the ancient system, usually, because the books were not easily available, the only way of learning anything was to go to the teacher, and the teacher would give a lesson. And then you could not have the second lesson until the teacher decided to give it. And oftentimes, in a good system, we read in the Vedic system of education, for instance, a student would go to the teacher would give one lesson. And then that lesson, the teacher would not give the second lesson until the first lesson was digested. Now I said, what does it mean by digesting? So there are two kinds of knowledge. One knowledge is a theoretical knowledge, the knowledge that we get by reading from books or hearing about it from our friends. The second kind of knowledge is called empirical knowledge. It's a knowledge that we get from experience. Hence, we can also call it experiential knowledge. Now, undigestion of the mind occurs when the theoretical knowledge that we have is in conflict with our empirical knowledge. In religious life, this can often lead to a divergence between what we believe in or what we talk about and what we actually do in life. How much of our life is an expression of who we really are? How far apart are we what we would like to be and where we are now? How do we bridge the gap between the aspirations that we have and our present state of mind? So that is the challenge. And when these two things get in great conflict and we find no way to resolve it, then this kind of a mental indigestion occurs. And so it is helpful, especially for serious spiritual seekers, to be judicious about what kind of ideas they allow to go inside them. Now, the ideas that have already gone in, we need to deal with them. But the one thing, whenever we become aware of the problem, the first thing to do is, as they say, when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. So when we become aware of the problem, there are already these ideas which have already gone in, and that needs to be taken care of. But the first thing is, I should be now going forward, be careful about what ideas I allow to go inside. And that would mean being judicious about the kind of company we keep, because a lot of the ideas that we get is from the people we move with. A lot of the ideas that we get is from the kind of books that we read, the kind of television programs I watch, the kind of movies I watch, the kind of internet surfing that I do. So I have to be judicious about what goes in, because if you have some junk information on your computer, it's oftentimes as easy as just pressing the delete button, and you can empty the trash on your computer. There is no delete button to remove the junk in our heads. It's a lot more difficult. That once things go it's relatively easy. If we eat junk food, it creates problems, but there is medicine to take care of, to remove the junk inside the body. But to remove the junk from inside the mind is a lot tougher, and therefore we have to be much more careful. We have to do that. Very briefly, I have we have discussed this on earlier occasions about the undigested ideas in the mind, the undigested food of the mind often comes along with the division of time that we make into past, present, and future. We know the lot of the undigested experiences of our past, they keep on popping up in the mind. So sometimes if we have had some difficult experiences in the past and the memories of the past can keep on bothering us. Not every memory of the past bothers us. That is because many of the things that have happened in our life, we have digested them well. But some of the things in our life have not been digested. And because they have not been digested, they are still wandering about in our system. And that needs to be addressed. There is also the anxiety and worry related to the future. That also feeds into the mind. So the junk that is really in the mind, what causes indigestion of the mind, are these unresolved conflicts, the unresolved experiences which come in the form of memories of the past and anxieties about the future. And therefore, we need to find a way to address them. Because only then, only when we have been able to address wisely these difficulties of the past and anxieties about the future, we will have the freedom to deal intelligently with the present. Because we can live only in the present. I cannot live yesterday because yesterday is gone. I cannot live in the tomorrow because tomorrow is not yet come. I can live only today. And even today, I can live only in this moment. But if I'm held captive by my past or by my future, then I'm not even living. Which is why oftentimes, if we look at our life up to this point, it may seem to have gone very fast. It's possible, although not necessary, but it's possible that a lot of the time that we have lived up to this point, we have not really lived at all. Because we were either thinking about the past or thinking about the future while the clock was ticking. And that's why the time moved very fast. The odd thing, if you like, is that when we think about the future, time seems much slower. If you think about the next 10 years, suppose someone were to say, oh, this is something we will do after 10 years. And we might say, oh, 10 years is such a long time. It's too early to think about it now. But if I think about the last 10 years, they have moved pretty fast. Now, if the last 10 years of my life have gone so fast, there is no reason why the next 10 years should be any slower. And so we need to really see that simply breathing doesn't mean living, but living with awareness. But awareness is what gets kidnapped, so to speak, by the past or the future. So that's one problem that we have to deal with. The problem of indigestion of the mind. The second problem that sometimes we face is overeating. Now, if we take in, just as there can be overeating in the body, there is overeating of the mind. If we take in more ideas than we can digest or that we can store, then we are headed for trouble. Swami Vivekananda made a distinction between information and insight. Now, these are his words. He said, "To me, the very essence of education is concentration of mind, not the collecting of facts. If I had to do my education over again and had any voice in the matter, I would not study facts at all. I would develop the power of concentration and detachment and then with a perfect instrument, I could collect facts at will. This is an ideal scenario. Again, we don't have any voice in the matter as well, because we are kind of just just a part of the system. It's very difficult. It's easy to say think outside the box, but we are all the system controls us. I'm not thinking of matrix or anything like that. I'm just saying in general. I'm harking back to the olden times, not necessary to say that exactly we can recreate the same thing today, but at least to know that things were done differently. And to some extent, if we can learn something from that experience today, we might be able to deal with these problems in a better way. So one of the things that was done in ancient forms of education was the first thing when the student went to a teacher's place in the Vedic period, for instance, the student was given a prayer. And it's the prayer called the Gayatri prayer. And the Gayatri prayer is really a prayer to unify the powers of the mind. And Dhiyo Yonaf Prachodaya, that's how the prayer ends. May these powers of the unified powers of my mind then go toward the desired object. So it was nothing but a prayer for not allowing the mind to get distracted, and then cultivating the capacity in the mind for it to concentrate, to focus. When the mind was thus trained, then it became easier. Then, of course, all that we needed to do was, oh, this is what I need to know. I take the mind and say, look at this. And concentration is the source of all knowledge. Whatever knowledge we have acquired in life has come on those rare moments when the mind was able to concentrate. And therefore, and he uses the word here, detachment, as well. He says, I would develop the power of concentration and detachment. Concentration is a kind of attachment. I'm attaching my body, mind, everything to the activity on hand or the idea that I'm dwelling on. So concentration is attachment. But since we have to do a bunch of things or even think of different ideas, if I get attached to one activity or one idea and not able to detach myself from it, then I won't be able to do justice to the next thing I need to do or the next idea I need to think. So we need both the powers of attachment and detachment. So the ability of the mind to attach itself completely, totally, to a given activity or a given thought, that's concentration. But once that thing is over, the mind must also have the ability to detach itself from it so that then it can be attached to whatever is the next thing that needs to be done. And that is why Swamiji said we need both the powers of concentration and detachment. And oftentimes, so these are two major problems that we need to recognize with regard to the mind, both indigestion and overeating. So these are similar problems to both the body and the mind. One of the things that is helpful is the practice of fasting. Many people who fast now and then have found that it does help their health. So just as fasting can help one's physical health, fasting can help one's mental health also. So what does it mean to make the mind fast? How about a periodic switching off of one's television or one's phones and stuff like that? But that would be kind of fasting to the mind. In fact, nowadays, many of these technology companies are recognizing the problem. In fact, those of you who use Apple products know that the new operating system will have a provision for a user to know how much time they are spending on each of the apps they use. And the hope is that perhaps that might make us more aware of the amount of time we use, and we might try to be more careful about it. And many of these devices nowadays also have parental controls, because so that make sure that your children or grandchildren don't spend all of their time with these devices, are able to pay attention to other important things in life as well. But parental controls somehow assumes that it's only the children have a problem, not the parents. So I wish they had some kind of a way that children could control. There are no children here, I hope. So, but no, in one sense, from spiritually speaking, we are all children. Physically, we may have grown, but we are still, no matter how old we are still children of our parents. So in some sense, even parents are children. But I just mentioned this to show that just as parents might recognize the value of having these parental controls, to be aware of the health, the spiritual and intellectual health of their children and grandchildren. But we have to be careful that whether our own health is important as well. So one of the things that we can begin with, it can be tough, but is like, when is the first time after waking up in the morning I will look inside my phone for a message? It might be good to just try it out and see. What if I don't switch on my phone right away after waking up? And just wait for 30 minutes. Try it for a few days and see. Well, if there is a major disaster by that, then you can stop that practice. But I have a feeling that no harm will be done, even if you don't look at your phone immediately after waking up. In fact, if anything, a lot of benefit can occur. So that's one thing that all of us can think. So how to fast the mind is to find creative ways of keeping away from these devices, which feed ideas, thoughts, information that I either don't need at all, or I don't need as quickly as I think I might need them. The harm that they can do is actually in multifarious ways it can hurt us. And one of the ways is it doesn't allow us to even an important information or news that comes in, it doesn't allow us the ability to take it in, dwell on it, see what it means, because no sooner something comes in and we read it and we either feel horrified by it or rejoice at it, after 2 minutes some other message comes. Something else is happening somewhere. And then that's left, and then I go someplace else. To some extent, the media is also functions that way. If there is some big news and it makes headlines, and then people are maybe talking about it for a day or a few hours, and then something else happens. And then that old news is just dropped off. You really don't even see it anywhere. Forget about headlines. Might be somewhere on, I was about to say page 12, but nowadays people don't read newspapers. So, well, it's just gone unless you kind of specifically look for something. So this inability even to hold on, even to whatever is happening in any part of the world, it's desensitizing us. We might read about a major earthquake or fire somewhere. We might hear or see it on television or read it on the internet about this disaster in which hundreds of people have died. And we might grief, we might be horrified by it. But very next moment, then we go to some other site and there's a World Cup football going on, and then people say, "Oh, this country won." So that moment of grief at these people dying is completely forgotten in a moment. And oftentimes, even if you watch the television news and they have all these terrible things happening, and immediately after that they say, "Good night." How can you have good night after getting all this terrible news? So again, either we say this thing of like good morning or good night are just rituals, don't take it seriously, because otherwise it makes no sense. After giving a deadly news that has happened in some part of the world or maybe in your own neighborhood, and then to end that conversation by saying good night. So overall, this too much of information of various kinds and one after another has desensitized us. It's so increasingly become difficult nowadays to see a real grief or even a real laughter or joy. There's just no time for it. The moment we start to grieve over something wonderful happens. The moment we try to smile, something terrible happens. So, and if it were a temporary problem, it's different. But now that's life as it is. So the networking, the way the brain functions, and if this kind of thing continues over generations, human beings are going to be very different creatures. Now, this might seem to be an over-exaggeration of the problem, but it's very real. Whether or not we know exactly how things would be after 30 or 40 years, but we can see the difference in our own lives. Especially those of us now who are not very young, who are not teenagers. We know things when we were very young. The world we grew up in, many of us, was very different from the world as it is today. And if we have time enough to reflect calmly about the changes that are occurring in the world outside and the corresponding changes that are occurring within me, in the way I think, in the way I relate to the world around me, the way I look upon work, the way I look upon myself, we need to be aware of these changes. Otherwise, we will have no idea in which direction our life is taking us. There is a story they tell about a man galloping away on a horse. And there was this one person standing by the roadside and is wondering, where is this person going? So he asked that person, "Hey, where are you going?" And the man on the horse said, "I don't know, ask the horse." Unfortunately, that may be what's happening to us. We think that we are under control, but life is dragging us. Events in the external world are dragging us. Technology and our fascination for these gadgets, again, may be taking us and we don't know where. And so, a mind on a diet really is a call for us to apply brakes a little bit. The world can go at whatever pace it chooses to go in, but I should have the freedom to slow down if I want to. And if I slow down, I might notice things I may have missed by just going too fast. So periodic allowing the mind to rest, just like allowing the body to rest, is very, very helpful. It's a healthy mind and a healthy body are essential for spiritual progress. We are all spiritual seekers here, and if we want to see a more tangible progress in our spiritual lives, then we have to do everything that is necessary to make both our healthy and our body and mind as healthy as we possibly can. There are limits to it, of course. Everything is not within our hands. But as much as it is within our hands, we must make sure that we don't contribute anything ourselves to bring about a dysfunction of either our body and mind. And there is, of course, then, as devotees, we pray, we seek divine help, we seek God's grace, that we know that we should know exactly what would be a wise way to take care of our life, our duties, our responsibilities, so that we become a blessing not only to our own selves, but to our family, to our friends, and to the people around us. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let us pray in silence for a minute. Next Sunday, we will have Antar Yoga, as always. There will be spiritual readings by members, music, prayer, meditation. And also we will celebrate the birthday of everyone born in the month of July. So you're welcome for next Sunday's Antar Yoga. Last week we concluded the Narada Bhakti Sutra that we were studying on the study group meeting on Wednesdays. So we will not have the study group meeting this Wednesday. And the next Wednesday is July 4th. So the next 2 weeks, we will not meet for the Wednesday evening class. We are going to begin a study of a small Upanishad called the Kaivalya Upanishad. And we will begin that study on July 11th. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.